Hey everybody, today I want to talk about motorcycle chains. Now in the past I've made multiple videos to do with motorcycle chains which can be found on my playlist Tips for New Riders and Mechanical Explanations. It's not just for new riders, it's also for people doing mechanical work for the first time. The videos I've made so far is how to tighten a motorcycle chain, so how to do an adjustment. There is one called how to adjust a motorcycle chain, but that's an old video, don't suggest that one. So the newer one, how to tighten a motorcycle chain. I've done how to shorten the motorcycle chain when you buy a chain that's too long. That is not to be used as to how to elongate the life of a chain, as we'll get onto in this video. How fast you can adjust the chain. I did it in, I think it's just about 2 minutes, start to finish, just to prove that you don't need to go to a garage to get them to do it. I've also made one called Common Mistakes, which covers a lot of the most common mistakes new riders make. So if you watch that, it will stop you making most of the mistakes, to be fair. So I've made all those videos, but I've never really made an in-depth explanation video like my mechanical explanation videos on motorcycle chains. I'm going to start off in this video by talking about the construction of them and explaining some of the differences there. I'm then going to explain the sizes and how the sizes are come around, and just it gets complicated, but from this you'll know it's actually quite simple for what you need to know to replace your chain. And I'm also going to talk about some common mistakes that happen, but my video on that's better because obviously it goes into much more detail. But I am going to talk about chain breakages and how they break. In my experience and from the research that I've done, I've basically looked at as many pictures of broken chains as I can, and there is a commonality between all of them. But I know that there will be a few outliers there from people who've watched this and said, mine didn't break like that. You won't believe this, because sometimes they go weird. So obviously what a motorcycle chain is there for is to transfer power from the engine to the rear wheel. Now the cool thing about motorcycle chains is that they are basically a flexible drive shaft, if you want to think of it like that way. Obviously a normal drive shaft gets turned one end and it turns the other, and you don't want twist in it. This is more like a lengthways drive shaft, and once it's under tension it's like a solid iron bar, and it's going to transfer energy very well. If there's slack in the chain, it's not going to work in the same way as a drive shaft. It would be like a loose drive shaft where it whacks every time. So we'll get into that when we talk about chain tension. But as for the construction of a chain, so a standard motorcycle chain is made up of 4 pieces that repeat. You have the inner plates, the outer plates, the pins and the rollers. And this is something a lot of people, I've experienced quite a few people not realising, is that this bit here is not a solid piece of metal. This actually is a roller that is supposed to move and turn. So this is obviously a chain together, and the way that these are constructed is all the pieces are put together and then the ends of the pins are peened over. You can see they're expanded so they go outside of the size of the hole. However, over time those can come apart, and we'll talk about that in the way that motorcycle chains can fail. But I just want to show you inside one. So obviously this is a normal chain with the pins ends ground off. So if we take those off, you've then got the inner sections, and these are those inner sections which are made up of the outer wall, the inner wall, sorry, the tubes. Oh, actually, I guess technically it's 5 parts because you've also got the tubes. Forgot about that. And then obviously you've got the rollers in the middle. And what I've done is I've taken one of those apart, which was actually not easy to do. They make tools to split chains the way you're supposed to. They don't make tools to do this. But yeah, you can take this part off, and then you can see that the rollers just come off, and these are actually roll pins. They've got splits in them, but they are designed that they will go in and keep it together. The amount of force it took for me to take this chain apart is pretty impressive. This is just a Lextech chain, but to get that plate off I had to put this in a vise, clamp it really hard, and then use a chisel to slowly try and lift it side by side and get it to lift off. And I was quite surprised, as I say, by how much force it took to do that, considering this is all held together using the pins on and the outside plates anyway. So that's the construction of a non-O-ring chain. On the O-ring, X-ring or whatever sort of sealed chains you get, basically each pin will have a small rubber washer which is either like an O-ring or it's got like an X shape to it, which sits either side pinned between the outer plates. So you'll have one here, one here, one here on the top side and on the bottom side that gets pinned by both plates. So, well, I can show you, I've got one here. Sorry. There is your O-ring there, and there, there and there, and that just repeats. And as I say, the idea of the O-ring is to stop, well, the idea of the O-ring is to keep the grease in and keep the dirt and water out. Some people say that it's actually better, depending on what you're doing, to not have that sort of chain, because if dirt or water gets inside, then it's kept there rather than a normal chain, you know, without O-rings, which you can properly clean out, blow out all the crud from inside the rollers and re-grease it. So that's an argument to be had, but generally O-rings for the road are considered better because you just really need to keep them cleaned, and they kind of self-lubricate for the middle because it keeps the grease in there, because this is what I'm going to get into, how motorcycle chains snap. You're less likely to get stuck links through corrosion inside there, unless water's got in and then it's caused corrosion in there, and then you've got tighter links anyway. The force on these O-rings, squidging them together, is a huge amount, so I don't see water getting in there that easily unless you jet wash it. But O-rings do degrade, and I have seen O-rings pop out of chains, get split, and you realise you haven't got one. The issue then comes is that there is supposed to be something in there, and your chain will be much looser than a normal non-O-ring chain, because obviously some of the tolerance is supposed to have a rubber thing in there, and it doesn't. Okay, so that's the basic construction motorcycle chain, all the different parts, and an explanation of what O-ring, X-ring chains are. So now let's go on to sizes, because you may see that different chains come in different sizes, and what do those sizes mean? And the way that they get to that number is interesting. Okay, so the top chain we have here is a 530, the next one down is a 525, the next one is a 520, the next one is also a 520, and the bottom one is a 420. What those numbers represent is two measurements. So what you should see it as a 5 dash the next number. And this is where it gets slightly complicated. Well, it's not complicated, it's simple, but I don't know. Metric would have made more sense than imperial here, I'm just saying. The 5 refers to pitch. Pitch is the distance between each pin. And the way that that is measured is in eighths of an inch. So the distance between there and there is 5/8 of an inch. So that's how you get your pitch number and the first number. So the distance between the pins on all of these 5 numbers is exactly the same. So it would fit on the same sprocket in the sense that the pins are the right distance apart in length. The second number is the width, but it's not the maximum width, it's the minimum width. It's actually the distance between the two inner walls here. Now obviously this can't be 20/8 of an inch because it would be much wider than it is long. What this is representing 2/8 of an inch. So the first number is how many eighths of an inch it is from pin to pin, the pitch, and then the width is how many eighths of an inch. You can kind of forget the second number if it's a 0, 3/8 of an inch, 2/8, which is 2/8 is a quarter of an inch. You see, this is getting more complicated. The 0.25 is obviously a middle size between the two. This is the point. It's not that complicated when you realise it's just eighths of an inch and how they're represented, but you don't really need to know this. You just need to know what's going to fit on your bike. But the thing is, you can change this. So, well, maybe we should explain. So if I take this sprocket here, which is supposed to take a 520 chain, as you can see, any of these 5s will fit on it without any problem, because the distance between the pins is correct. But the 420, although the width is correct, so if we try a single link, it will kind of fit on. As you can see, it will not fit because the distance between the pins is all out. And this is why I've said in the past that motorcycle chains don't stretch, they wear. If they stretched, this would happen. If they physically got longer, it wouldn't be possible for them to work. They'd keep jumping on the teeth. What happens is it wears on the pins that are on the rollers in the middle. That means that there is more give between each link front to back. And when you times that by 130 links, you're talking about quite a lot of extra movement. So although the chain will look physically longer if you pull it out under tension, if you compressed it all back down to its original size to take the wear out, it would be the same length. Motorcycle chains do not stretch. That would require each link to get a little bit longer, and then that just wouldn't work. So that's explained the distance from pin to pin for pitch. The width, as you can see, this chain and this sprocket, that's about right. There needs to be a little bit of side-to-side play, but that is the right size chain for this sprocket. Remember, 520. So if we go up to the 530, to give an extreme example, it fits absolutely fine, tooth to tooth, but look at the amount of side-to-side play, because the second number, the 30, means that what this wants is 2/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch, and what this size chain wants is a sprocket which is 3/8 of an inch wide. So you can't put a 520 chain on a 530 sprocket because it will be too wide, it just won't fit. You shouldn't put a 530 chain on a 520 sprocket because it will have too much side-to-side play. So to sort of cover what's the most common sizes, 520 is about what you're going to find on most 125s, up to 4, 5, even some 600s. Actually, no, I think Divi uses a 520 still. There is a 525, which is obviously somewhere in between the two, so it's a little bit beefier. And then you have things like the 530, which you're going to use on a much more powerful, heavy bike that's going to take a lot of load on the chain. You beef it up by giving it extra width. So if you, for instance, had a small bike that you put a much larger engine in, you might want to increase the size of the chain to account for that. As I say, if it's like a 125 to a 250 and you've got a 520 on it, you're going to be fine. But if you're doing something silly, then you might want to go to something quite a bit beefier. You can't, as I say, just put that on the old sprockets. You just buy sprockets which fit your bike but are thicker, and then you get the thicker corresponding chain. So you need to make sure that the chain and sprockets are the matching set. And as I mentioned in my common mistakes video, it's important to point this out. If you change your chain and sprockets, you change all of them at the same time. Never put an old chain onto new sprockets, and don't put a new chain onto old sprockets. They need to bed in together, and they wear together. If they've not worn together over time, they're going to be mismatched, they're going to wear fast, you're going to have more issues, and it's not advised. So now you should understand the construction of a motorcycle chain, the different types of motorcycle chains, the sizes, how they get to these sizes, what that means, and how that applies to you if you wish to change chain sizes, but generally it's not advised, well, it's not needed. And I've mentioned that common mistake of not changing chain and sprockets at the same time. As I say, watch my common mistakes video, it's got a lot more stuff in it. But now I want to talk about how motorcycle chains break specifically. Both physically, how do they break, and also why do they break. So first, the main, if not only reason that chains will snap, and I mean physically snap, is either a manufacturer fault, which is quite unlikely. Even in the cheap chains, and I've looked through a lot of them, doing all the works that I did and making all the keychains I did, I never had one that had an issue that was a problem with it. It's normally lack of maintenance, or it's going to be lack of maintenance, because everything here moves, it's very strong. If, however, you don't do chain maintenance, there's dirt and grime all over your chain and in here, it's starting to rust up, and you get what's called a stuck link. Now, this is where I'm going to need my bigger piece of chain here. So on your bike, when it's at the side of the road, you should see the chain sitting like this. I mean, it might have a slight bow in it, because you've got to have a little bit of give for when you sit on the bike, because that increases tension on the bike. That's another thing I cover in tightening chains. So you don't want to over tighten your chain by tightening it for the bike being on the ground and then you get on it, and that would be kind of normal looking. If you see something like this, or even something like sort of this, just something out of line like that, that means you've got a stuck link or a link which is not turning freely. So when they break, the most common place that I've seen is that they break between the pin, zoom in here, they break the outer plate between the pin here and this edge. And the reason I think this happens is because you get stuck links, and when I had a chain break on me many years ago, and I got very lucky here because it did no damage to the bike really, other than destroying the gear position indicator sensor, which required taking side of the engine off and replacing the part. Thankfully I had one anyway, but it didn't do any crankcase damage, and I'll talk about that in a minute. What I think happens is, obviously the tightest radius a chain goes through on a motorcycle is the front sprocket. So it would be like this on your bike. When that stuck link that doesn't want to turn, say it's this way, gets pulled through here, it's going to get turned. And if it refuses to turn, and that happens to be at a point in time where it's done it many, many times and it's starting to fatigue this, or your chain is loose and it's whacking, because shock loading over time can cause the crack to form and then it just goes at some point. It's going to get around here to a certain point where it won't want to turn, and then it's just going to go snap. Now, when it snaps on one side, that automatically puts a huge amount of pressure onto the top surface, which is going to cause this piece here to go flying off, most likely. That then causes all of the load to go on the opposite side of the chain, and it kind of wrenches the side off over the peening, very often, it would seem, or even just pulling the whole thing apart, and it just breaks in two. Now, as I say, if you get lucky, what's going to happen is your chain's going to get spat out the back of your bike, and you're just going to have to brake and be very careful because you've got no engine braking. So you're free rolling, no power, no engine braking, it's on the brakes alone. And yeah, that's a different matter. If you go into neutral and try and brake, it feels quite different. Anyway, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that it wraps around, well, I don't know what is worst. You would say the case is a scenario, better way to put it, the scenarios you don't want to happen. It can, when it comes around, obviously, if it breaks back here somewhere towards the rear wheel, when it comes around, this front edge is going to whip off the front of the sprocket, and this bit here can go through the side of the engine casing. So a snap chain can smash your engine casing, and I mean obliterate. Many bikes have a guard built in here that will take the hit and get absolutely mangled, but you can replace them. Some bikes don't. On my Pulse, where I did have the snap chain, it did have a small guard there, but it still managed to get around that and break the gear position indicator, but it didn't get to the actual casting of the engine. So that's one thing that's like, you know, goodbye bike engine, pretty much, because you don't want that. The other option is somehow it kinks up and then it starts doing one of these and it wraps around, and you can see pictures of the front sprocket with a chain absolutely wrapped around it, and the only thing that stopped it is it getting crammed into the engine casing, and that's caused the engine to just stop suddenly. The rear wheel is going to be free turning in that scenario. Another option, obviously, is that it wraps around the rear sprocket, not the front one, and then it can lock up your rear wheel. So at whatever speed you're doing, your wheel's just going to lock, and you're going to have to deal with that. And obviously in these scenarios, if this happens in a corner, you can crash, which you obviously don't want to do generally. One of the other scenarios, and this has happened to a few extremely unlucky people, is that the chain comes up, whips around the bike and whips them across the foot or the leg. And I've seen some injuries even through bike boots, which are pretty nasty. This is why motorcycle chain maintenance is so important, and this is why you don't mess around with it. It's as important as your brakes, really, because it can cause catastrophic failures and stoppages of your bike at any moment if it's wrong. If you look out for the common signs, if you do the maintenance, if you clean it up when it needs cleaning up, you should be all right and it should last enough time. But you should also not push your chain and sprockets too far. Obviously, once these are looking, you know, more grooved out, like these actually are, they shouldn't be this wide, really. You have to replace them. If you're getting to the point you're getting waved over teeth or missing teeth, you're really, really not taking things seriously. And the place you tend to see that is on 125s, if I'm honest. One other thing I should quickly mention is why this link looks different. This is a linking link. You can either have Rivet or split links. Rivet links are better, without question. They are safer if they're installed correctly. They are more difficult to install and you need specialist tools. It's not difficult to install, but more difficult. If you're going to use a split link, and personally I don't have an issue using them, even on the 600cc, but it's got 78 brake horsepower, so, you know, 80, 90 brake horsepower, but maybe you really want to make sure you've got a Rivet link. Some people would say not even a 125, not even a bicycle. Wouldn't touch, whatever. You've just got to make sure that they're fitted correctly, they are in good condition, and also make sure they're on the right way round. That means that when they turn around, they're not likely to get pinged off. So you want to make sure the tail is facing backwards, as in the open part. Now, obviously, there are other ways that chains break. As I say, you can have manufactural errors. I've even seen one split through the middle here that then has put force on the other side. Sometimes you'll get a chain snap only on one side and you won't get it on the other side. It will just sort of bend over if you're lucky, if you're really lucky. But yeah, snapping chains is something you never want to deal with. Do your chain maintenance. It's really important. Well, there we go. That should have covered a lot of stuff for new people, and maybe even experienced people that haven't looked into this too much. To, you know, the construction, the rollers, explaining how the O-rings fitted in, pros and cons of those. I only really see them as pros, but some people argue about it. I even jet washed mine and I haven't found an issue with it, so You should now also understand what the sizes mean, how they're measured, and how that affects you and what you can do with them. And also a few common mistakes. I'll say I've got a better video for that called Common Mistakes, and how they break physically generally and what the outcome of that is. For one video, that should be pretty good. So if you've learned something from this, I would really appreciate if you'd hit that like button. Maybe share the video around or share my playlist tips for new riders. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, I'm very close to 100k and I would very much appreciate that. I know about 70% of my audience don't actually subscribe, so if you want to jump on board, remember it's free and it's not like a tattoo, it's not permanent. If you decide in the future you don't like my videos, you can unsubscribe, but if you want to help me on my way to 100k, please do that. And if you'd like to help support this channel so I can continue to make these videos, this is my full-time job. At the moment I'm dealing with horrible weather, so I'm going to my mechanical explanations. Normally I do bike reviews and things like that, which come later into the year when things improve and the companies have bikes. But you can help support this channel by joining Patreon, and that gives you benefits as well, as you should see down here at the moment. Otherwise, thank you for watching, stay safe, have fun, bye bye.